Before we start, I want to say that only 1% of you are subscribed. Please subscribe because when we reach 1,000 subscribers, I will post a special video for you. David leaned against the cool glass of his studio window, watching the relentless rain drum against the cityscape. The rhythm was broken by the sudden flash of a transport vehicle descending through the clouds, a sight that was still new and extraordinary even after several months of the intergalactic exchange program. As the vehicle touched down with a silent grace, characteristic of its advanced technology, David's thoughts raced. He was about to meet Elian, his assigned helper from a distant world he barely knew anything about. His usual solitude was about to be disrupted, a fact he met with both apprehension and a quiet thrill. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing slightly in the spacious hall of his apartment. David straightened his shirt, a nervous habit, and opened the door. Before him stood Elian, her appearance markedly different from humans, with luminescent skin that subtly changed hues with her mood, and eyes that seemed to capture the depth of the ocean. "David, I presume?" Elian's voice was melodic, her words tinged with an unfamiliar accent that made them flow like a gentle stream. "Yes, and you must be Elian. Please, come in." David stepped aside, gesturing into the warmly lit foyer. "I hope the journey here was comfortable." "It was fascinating," Elian replied, stepping inside and looking around with evident curiosity. "Your planet has so many vibrant colors and textures. It's quite different from the muted tones of Iridia." David smiled, leading her into the living area. "I can imagine it might be a bit overwhelming at first. Can I get you anything? Water, or maybe something to eat?" "No, thank you," she said, her gaze settling on a series of paintings that adorned the walls. "You did these? They're remarkable." "Ah, yes, I did." David walked over to one of the paintings, a tumultuous sea under a stormy sky. "Painting is my profession and my passion." Elian approached, her fingers hovering inches from the canvas, as if feeling the tempest captured in oils. "On Iridia, we use light as our medium. Your form is tangible, evocative." David watched her, intrigued by her reaction. "Light, you say? I'd love to see that someday. How does it work?" "It's difficult to explain without showing you." Elian smiled apologetically. "But perhaps, during my time here, I can try to recreate something similar with the tools available." "That would be amazing," David responded enthusiastically. "Actually, I have a workshop with various materials and tools. You're welcome to use anything you find." "Thank you, David. That's very generous." Elian's skin shifted to a warmer hue, a sign of her pleasure, he guessed. "I would appreciate a guide to what's considered private and public in your home, to respect your boundaries." "Of course," David said, leading her on a brief tour of the apartment, pointing out areas like his studio, where he preferred some privacy, and other spaces that were more communal. As they moved through the different rooms, David found himself explaining more than just the layout. He talked about his life, his art, and his occasional forays into the culinary world, which seemed to pique Elian's interest. "And here," David said, opening a door to a small balcony garden, "is my attempt to bring some green into this urban jungle." Elian stepped out onto the balcony, inhaling deeply. "The air is so rich with life here. Back home it's all recycled and artificial." "Sounds efficient but impersonal," David noted, leaning on the railing beside her. "Exactly," Elian agreed, turning to face him with a thoughtful expression. "Perhaps while I learn about human culture, I can share bits of Iridian life with you. A cultural exchange in true sense." David nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "I'd like that." "It's settled then. Tomorrow we start with a little bit of each world." As the city lights flickered on one by one below them, marking the onset of night, the two stood in quiet companionship, the distance between two worlds subtly narrowing. David woke to the sound of soft humming coming from the kitchen, an alien tune that was strangely soothing. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock, still early, but Elian was already up. Curious, he slid out of bed and padded towards the kitchen. As he approached, he saw Elian standing by the stove, manipulating what looked like pancakes but smelled entirely foreign. She glanced over her shoulder and smiled. "Good morning, David. I thought I'd try making breakfast today." "What's cooking?" David asked, leaning on the doorframe, intrigued by the greenish hue of the batter. "It's a traditional Iridian dish," Elian explained, flipping a pancake with ease. "It's made from a grain similar to your wheat, but it reacts with heat to change color. I found something similar in your pantry." "I'm impressed," David chuckled, walking over to take a closer look. "It smells good, too. I hope it tastes just as pleasant." Elian served 2 plates and gestured to the small dining table. They sat, and David took a tentative bite. The flavor was nutty, with a hint of sweetness he couldn't quite place. "That's actually really good," he declared, genuinely pleased. "You'll have to teach me how to make this sometime." "I'd be happy to," Elian responded with a pleased glint in her eyes. "It's fascinating to see how ingredients behave differently under similar conditions." Their breakfast continued with light conversation about their plans for the day. David mentioned wanting to show Elian some of the city's historical sites, thinking it might give her a better context of human culture. As they were clearing up, a sudden noise from the living room startled them both. David rushed in to find his cat, Whiskers, batting at a strange metallic object on the floor, an Iridian personal item Elian had brought with her. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," Elian exclaimed, rushing to rescue her belongings. "He's usually not this mischievous." "It's okay," David laughed, picking up Whiskers. "He's just curious like someone else I know." Elian smiled, bending down to retrieve her item. "Curiosity is valued on Iridia, too. It leads to understanding." With the morning's excitement settled, they ventured out into the city. David led Elian through bustling streets, pointing out landmarks and explaining their significance. Elian listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the architecture and the throngs of people. At one point they stopped at a vendor selling handcrafted jewelry. Elian was drawn to a set of earrings fashioned in the likeness of Earth's moon. "It's beautiful," she said, touching the smooth metal. "We have nothing like this back home." "Consider it a gift, then," David said, purchasing the earrings before she could protest. "A small memento of your visit." Elian touched the earrings now dangling from her ears. "Thank you, David. I will treasure these." As the day waned, they found themselves at a small, secluded park. It was a peaceful spot, overlooked by most tourists. They sat on a bench, watching children play around a fountain. "Earth is beautiful," Elian mused. "So vibrant and full of life. I can see why you love painting it." David nodded, following her gaze. "It's home, but I imagine Iridia has its own beauty, too." "It does," Elian agreed. "Perhaps not as colorful, but just as meaningful to those who know it." As they shared stories of their respective planets, David realized how much he enjoyed having Elian around. She saw his world through fresh eyes, making even the mundane seem magical again. "Today was great," he finally said as they started to head back. "We should do this more often while you're here." "I would like that very much," Elian replied, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the setting sun. "There's still so much I want to discover." And as they walked back in comfortable silence, David felt a warm sense of anticipation for the days ahead. David and Elian found themselves at a cozy cafe the following afternoon, a little nook of the city that David cherished for its quiet and the quality of its coffee. As they settled into the soft couches with their drinks, David decided it was a good moment to delve deeper into the nuances of human and Iridian cultures. "So I've been thinking," David started, stirring his coffee. "We've shared quite a bit about our daily lives, but we haven't really touched on more personal aspects like relationships or how we express affection. I think understanding that might help us avoid any awkward situations." Elian nodded, her face thoughtful. Yes, I've noticed humans touch quite frequently. Friends hug. You shake hands. On Iridia, touch is more deliberate, reserved for close family or significant bonds. David raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Really? Here it's almost second nature. A pat on the back, a touch on the arm. It can be casual, but it also communicates a lot. That's what I find so fascinating, Elian replied. In the few days I've been here, observing those interactions has been very enlightening. David chuckled. I guess it can look pretty strange from the outside. But it's all about context and consent. It's important that everyone's comfortable. For example, if I were to offer a handshake, he extended his hand across the table, palm open. Elian studied it for a moment before extending her own, her hand slightly trembling as it met his. The contact was brief but seemed to spark a mutual understanding. Like that, David smiled. It's a common greeting here, a sign of respect, or an introduction. Elian withdrew her hand, still smiling. I see. It's quite pleasant, actually, when you understand the meaning behind it. Their conversation drifted to other cultural practices, music, art, and holidays. Elian was particularly interested in the concept of music festivals, a gathering to celebrate and enjoy music, something that was uncommon on Iridia. It sounds so lively, so communal, she mused. Iridia has formal gatherings, but they are more ceremonial. Celebrating just for enjoyment is a lovely concept. David's eyes lit up. There's actually a music festival next week. It's not too far. We could go, if you're interested. Elian's face brightened. I would love that, David. It would be a wonderful experience. Their plans made, they spent the rest of the afternoon discussing what to expect at the festival, the kinds of music they might hear, and the food they would eat. David explained about different genres of music and what they might signify culturally. As the cafe began to fill with the evening crowd, David and Elian decided to walk back to his apartment. Along the way, David pointed out more sights: the local theater, the public library, and a small art gallery. When you paint, Elian suddenly asked, is it a solitary activity or do humans collaborate? It can be both, David replied. Personally, I usually paint alone, but collaborations aren't uncommon. Sometimes working with another artist can bring a new dimension to your work. Could we collaborate? Elian asked tentatively. I could show you some Iridian techniques, maybe incorporate light and color in ways you haven't tried before. David considered her proposal, the idea stirring a new creative urge within him. That sounds amazing, Elian. Let's plan for that after the festival. It'll be a blending of both our worlds. Yes, let's, she agreed, her voice filled with anticipation. As they reached David's building, the fading light cast long shadows on the sidewalk, mirroring the growing connection between the two. With each shared moment and exchanged story, the gap between their worlds seemed to narrow, replaced by a budding friendship that promised to blossom into something enriching and new. David and Elian arrived early at the festival grounds, the air buzzing with the setup of stages and the early arrivals milling around, exploring the various booths and attractions. David led Elian through the growing crowd, pointing out different genres of music represented at each stage. As you can see, there's quite a variety, David explained, handing her a small map of the venue. Each stage has a different theme: rock, jazz, electronic, and even some world music. It should give you a pretty good taste of Earth's musical diversity. Elian studied the map intently, her eyes wide with curiosity. And all these people come together just to enjoy music? It's quite extraordinary. Exactly, David nodded. Music has a way of bringing people together, no matter their background. They started at the jazz stage where a band was setting up, their instruments gleaming under the morning sun. As the band started playing, the smooth melodies of the saxophone filled the air, and Elian seemed mesmerized. It feels so fluid, so expressive, she remarked, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. "It's all about expression," David agreed, feeling the music himself. "Jazz is very much about going with the flow, responding to the other musicians in real time." They spent the next few hours wandering from stage to stage. At the world music venue, Elian was particularly taken with a group playing traditional African drums. The energetic beats seemed to vibrate through the ground, and she couldn't help but join in with the crowd, dancing to the rhythmic pounding. David laughed, joining her as they both lost themselves in the music, the crowd's energy infectious. "You're a natural," he shouted over the music. "It's hard not to be moved by such powerful sounds," Elian called back, her laughter mingling with the beat. As afternoon turned into evening, they grabbed some food from one of the many vendors, David choosing a classic hot dog, and Elian opting for a vegetarian wrap. They found a spot on the grass near the main stage, where a well-known rock band was scheduled to perform. While they ate, David turned the conversation back to their planned collaboration. "So, about our project. I was thinking we could start with one of my basic sketches and see how we can integrate your light techniques into it." Elian nodded eagerly, her mind already racing with ideas. "I think that could work beautifully. Your landscapes could gain a new dimension with some iridian lighting effects. Perhaps we can create something that seems to change as the viewer moves around it, using light to add depth and movement." "That sounds incredible," David mused, inspired by her ideas. "It's going to be something completely new for me, but I'm excited to see what we come up with together." Their planning was interrupted as the rock band took the stage, the opening chords of their first song sending a wave of cheers through the crowd. David and Elian joined the applause, their earlier conversation weaving a bond between them, now strengthened by their shared experiences throughout the day. As the band played on, the sky darkened, and the stage lights grew brighter, casting colorful patterns into the night. Elian looked over at David, her expression one of contentment. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said, her voice sincere. "I've learned so much today, not just about music, but about what it means to share experiences with others." David smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond the music and the crowd. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. There's something special about sharing what you love with someone new. It sort of renews it for you." As the final encore drew to a close, they lingered a moment, watching as people began to drift away, still humming tunes or chatting excitedly about their favorite performances. Together, David and Elian walked back towards the exit, their steps in sync with the fading beats from the festival, both feeling a deeper connection not just to each other, but to the world around them. After the music festival, the atmosphere between David and Elian was charged with a new energy. They spent the following days in David's studio, their collaborative project taking shape more beautifully than either had anticipated. One evening, as twilight turned the sky a soft purple, they were putting the finishing touches on their creation. A large canvas that looked like a simple landscape at first glance, but revealed intricate light patterns that shifted with the viewer's perspective. David stepped back, admiring their work. "It's incredible, Elian. The way the light plays off the surface, it's like the scene is alive." Elian, who had been adjusting a small light emitter, looked up and smiled. "It is alive, in a way. It's a piece of both our worlds." The room was quiet for a moment, the only sound the soft humming of the light mechanisms. David glanced at Elian, noticing the way the shifting lights played across her face, highlighting the subtle changes in her skin tones. "Elian, have you ever... back on Iridia, did you..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Experience something like this?" Elian finished for him, her voice gentle. "Working so closely with someone else, sharing creative ideas and seeing them come to life?" "Yeah," David nodded, feeling a rush of relief that she understood. "Exactly that." Elian set down her tools and stepped closer. "On Iridia, collaboration is rare outside of professional settings. What we have done here, it's much more personal. I have never shared so much of myself with anyone, Not even on my home planet." David felt his heartbeat quicken. "Me neither. I mean, I've worked with other artists before, but this is different. It feels more connected." They were standing very close now, the light from the canvas illuminating their faces. Elian looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of emotions. "David, I am grateful to you, not just for sharing your art, but for showing me your world, your passions." Moved by her words, David reached out tentatively and took her hand. The contact was light, but it sent a thrill through him. "Elian, She met his gaze steadily. Then, impulsively, she stepped forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, exploratory at first, but as David responded, it deepened, both of them expressing the pent-up feelings that had been building over their weeks together. When they finally parted, they were both breathless. "I have read about human kissing," Elian whispered, a slight flush on her cheeks. "It's considered a form of bonding, an expression of affection," David finished, his voice low. "Yes, it's a way to show, well, how you feel about someone." "And how do you feel?" Elian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David didn't hesitate. "I feel like I've found someone truly special, and I want to explore where this goes, if you do." Elian nodded, squeezing his hand. "I would like that very much." That night, they left the studio together, hand in hand, their steps light as they walked through the quiet streets. The city around them felt alive, vibrant, but nothing matched the excitement in their hearts. They had crossed a threshold tonight, moving from friends and collaborators to something more, a relationship that promised new discoveries and a deeper understanding of not just each other's worlds, but of themselves. The days following their first kiss were a mix of exhilaration and a deepening sense of intimacy between David and Elian. They continued their artistic collaboration, but now there was an undercurrent of personal discovery in every interaction. One morning, as they walked through a quiet park, David broached a topic that had been on his mind. "Elian, back on Iridia, how do relationships usually progress? I mean, we've shared some important moments, and I just want to be sure I'm respecting your customs." Elian smiled, appreciating his consideration. "On Iridia, relationships are very structured. There are specific stages and rituals to observe. But what we have is different, David. We're navigating this based on our feelings, not a set of rules. And I find that liberating." "That's good to hear," David replied, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Because, to be honest, I'm not just exploring this relationship out of curiosity. I'm really starting to care about you deeply." Elian's face lit up with her smile, her skin shifting through a spectrum of warm colors. "And I've never connected with anyone the way I have with you." They continued their walk, their conversation turning to plans for a new joint art project. As they discussed ideas, David suggested, "Why don't we make something that combines not just our artistic styles, but also something personal from each of us? Something that symbolizes this new phase of our relationship?" Intrigued, Elian thought it over. "What if we create a sculpture? We could use materials from Earth and Iridia. The design could reflect the convergence of our worlds, our cultures." David nodded, excited by the idea. "Let's sketch some ideas when we get back. This could be our most meaningful piece yet." Back at David's studio, they spread out materials and tools, and began sketching and discussing their design. The sculpture they envisioned was abstract, with intertwining forms that suggested a dance or an embrace. They decided on a mix of earthly metals and iridian light fibers, which would illuminate the sculpture from within. As they worked, their hands occasionally touched, each contact sending a jolt of warmth through them. It was late afternoon when Elian looked up from her sketch and said softly, "David, I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about caring deeply. I feel the same, and I wonder if—" She was interrupted by David's phone ringing. Apologetic, he glanced at the caller ID. It was his sister, Sarah. "I'm sorry, I need to take this," he said, stepping away to talk. Elian watched him, her heart full of emotions. When David returned, his expression was serious. "That was Sarah. She's heard about us, about me being involved with someone from Iridia. She's coming over tomorrow. She wants to meet you." Nervous but understanding the importance of family and human relationships, Elian nodded. "I would like to meet her too. It's important that the people in your life know about us, especially if they matter to you." David reached out, taking her hands in his. "Thank you, Elian, for understanding, for being here. Tomorrow will be fine, you'll see." Sarah's really open-minded. They spent the rest of the evening finalizing their sculpture design, but the upcoming meeting with David's sister lingered in the back of their minds, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. Yet the bond between them had grown strong, and they were ready to face those challenges together, united by their deepening affection and shared creative spirit. The following afternoon, David paced nervously around his apartment as he awaited his sister Sarah's arrival. Elian, noticing his anxiety, placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, David, it will be fine," she reassured him with a gentle smile. I know. It's just that Sarah can be protective. And with everything being so new and different with us," David sighed, then smiled back at her. "But I'm glad she'll get to meet you." The doorbell rang, cutting through the remainder of his thoughts. David took a deep breath and opened the door. Sarah stepped in, her eyes immediately falling on Elian. "Sarah, this is Elian. Elian, my sister Sarah." David introduced them formally. "It's nice to meet you, Elian," Sarah said, her tone polite but reserved as she extended her hand. Elian took Sarah's hand, her greeting warm. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Sarah. David has told me a lot about you." Sarah raised an eyebrow slightly, looking between David and Elian. "Let's sit down. I'm curious about how you two met and what this means for you, David." They settled into the living room, and David began recounting how he and Elian had met through the exchange program, their growing friendship, and eventually their collaborative art projects. As he spoke, Sarah listened intently, her initial reservations slowly melting away as she saw the genuine affection and respect between David and Elian. "So, this isn't just about work, then? You're in a relationship?" David nodded, reaching out to take Elian's hand. "Yes, we are. It started with our project, but it quickly became more than that." Sarah watched the interaction, her gaze softening. "I see. And how do you handle the differences? I mean, it's not every day you hear about a human and an alien in a relationship," Elian answered. "It's about understanding and respecting each other's cultures and values. We have learned a lot from each other, and we are careful to communicate openly about our feelings and differences." "That's good to hear," Sarah said, now smiling genuinely. "David, you've always been one to follow your heart. Just make sure you're also thinking about the future." "We have," David assured her. "We're aware of the challenges ahead, but we believe what we have is worth it." Sarah nodded, looking between them again. "Well, I can see you're serious about this. Just know that I'm here for both of you if you need anything." The atmosphere relaxed considerably after that, and they spent the rest of the visit discussing lighter topics, including Sarah's recent vacation and Elian's fascination with Earth's cuisine. As Sarah prepared to leave, she hugged David tightly, then turned to Elian and hugged her too. "Take care of him," she whispered, then added louder, "and let me know when I can see some of your collaborative art. It sounds fascinating." "We will," Elian promised, a grateful look in her eyes. After Sarah left, David exhaled deeply, looking relieved. "That went better than I expected." Elian chuckled, squeezing his hand. "I told you it would be fine." David smiled, pulling her into an embrace. "Thank you for being amazing. I think today was a big step for us." "It was," Elian agreed, resting her head against his chest. "And every step we take together makes us stronger." As they stood in the quiet of the living room, The challenges they faced seemed less daunting, overshadowed by the strength of their bond and the support of David's family. They were ready to face the future together, no matter what it held. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity for David and Elian as they prepared for the first exhibition of their collaborative work. The sculpture that symbolized the convergence of their worlds was the centerpiece, surrounded by their other artworks that had gradually taken form over their time together. David adjusted the lighting around the sculpture one final time, stepping back to assess the effect. The interplay of earthly metals and iridian light fibers created a mesmerizing glow that filled the gallery space. "It looks perfect, David," Elian said, coming to stand beside him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of their creation. "I think we're ready," David replied, his voice a mix of excitement and nerves. "I just hope the people who come tonight can see what we've tried to capture here." "They will," Elian assured him, her hand finding his for a comforting squeeze. As the evening began, guests started to filter into the gallery. Among them were art enthusiasts, critics, friends, and even some who were simply curious about the unusual pairing of a human and an alien in artistic partnership. David and Elian greeted each visitor, explaining their work and the story behind each piece. "I never imagined seeing something like this," one guest commented, marveling at the sculpture. "It's like you've brought a piece of another world right here." "That was the idea," Elian responded, pleased. "To share a bit of Iridia with Earth and show how our perspectives can blend into something beautiful." David watched the interactions, feeling a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. The doubts and challenges that had once seemed so daunting were now overshadowed by the acceptance and admiration they were receiving. As the evening wore on, Sarah arrived, her eyes wide as she took in the gallery setup. "This is incredible, David," she said, giving him a hug. "I knew you were working on something special, but this—" "Thanks, Sarah," David smiled, then introduced her to some of the other guests. Later, as the crowd thinned, David and Elian found a quiet moment to themselves by the sculpture. "Do you think we've changed any minds tonight?" David asked, watching a couple of guests still discussing one of the paintings. "We may have," Elian considered. "But more importantly, we've shown that it's possible to create something unified from two very different perspectives." David nodded, his gaze settling on the sculpture. "We've started a conversation at least, and that's more than I could have hoped for. And it's only the beginning," Elian added, her voice full of optimism. "There's so much more we can do, so many more ideas to explore." "That's the spirit," David agreed, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Tonight was a success, but tomorrow we start planning our next project." Elian laughed, leaning into his embrace. "With you, I'm ready for anything." The gallery lights dimmed as the last guests departed, leaving David and Elian in the soft glow of their shared achievement. They stood together in silence, not needing words to express the contentment and hope they felt for their future. As they locked up the gallery and walked into the cool night, the city lights sparkled around them, mirroring the light of their sculpture. In that moment, both knew they had not only bridged their worlds, but had also paved the way for a future filled with possibility and mutual understanding.